Yeah, I think it's time to get this party started. What's up, what's good, and what's happening? This is Mark with the Echelon Broadcast. Welcome back. It's been an interesting week. We've got the timer running right there. We've got new camera angle, looking good. And the main camera angle, obviously, recording over here. And just to kick things off, let me show you this one interesting piece of furniture I've got behind me. So this is the Star of Awesomeness. I'm part of a B&I business networking group down here in southwestern Florida. Let me just put that right there. Thumbnail. There we go. So let's start off with that, and then we'll kind of work our way backwards. So first of all, why is that important to have that? Well, to me, it's an acknowledgement of my recent achievements. And although you definitely don't want to get used, let me kind of simplify things. I want to make sure that when I'm going into these things, into the broadcast, the podcast, that I'm very specific, because I have a tendency to get very up in the clouds with the stuff that I talk about. And I've been told by many, many people, or a few very close people, so that it counts for, that like equals many, many people. I've been told by a couple of close friends that I need to fix my shit and be more specific. So in this particular case, I'm going to work on that and be more specific. And so to bring it, let's start by talking about the Star of Awesomeness. Thank you very much to Dan Patton, PDR Kitchen and Bath, for endowing me with the Star of Awesomeness this week. And what he said, and this is very important feedback, is he said that this is because he really appreciates someone who is on their grind, on their hustle, and that's because I've been producing all of this content and really putting it out there for you guys to see. And so that's good acknowledgement. You don't necessarily need that that acknowledgement of your work, but it definitely helps to have some realistic feedback from the world that there is something good in what you're doing and that it matters to the people around you. Because if you're just doing stuff for yourself, and this is something I've learned very recently, well, not recently, it's been accumulation of this learning over time. The thing that I learned is that if you're just kind of doing stuff on your own, that's good. And I think we are in a world where it definitely is very self-serving for you to be sort of a solo entrepreneur, a solopreneur as it's called. But you have to realize that your solopreneurship means nothing without the context of that thing in a business. And in order to have a business, you need to be able to serve people. In order to serve people, you need to listen to their feedback in order for your business to be successful. And obviously, I want this particular venture, the Echelon Broadcast, to be successful. Oh, I don't even know where to look. Sorry. It's just that this camera to my left and the camera in front of me are now actually really good quality, so it's a bit of a problem. But anyways, moving on. So what I was saying was you need feedback in order for you to not only prove that the product that you're creating is good, but that it actually means anything to anyone. Otherwise, you're just, having come from Los Angeles, there's a lot of people who are sort of in the clouds, and they think that they're going to be celebrities. They're 70 years old, and they're like, I remember walking down the street in the particular neighborhood that I was living in, and there was always this guy who drove around in a car, and it was like he was plastering. He put his name on his car, I believe the associations he was involved in, and you would catch him every now and then on a weekend walking around on Larchmont trying to sell his movies, his DVDs, and it's good. Like, it's good to see that. But the thing is, he probably, like, as far as I can tell, he probably wasn't really taking in the feedback of what the people asked for and expected of him to play the roles that he was fit to play. And so what ends up happening is you kind of end up being this burnout. And that is in the back of my mind constantly. So it's this balance of, I want to create content that is uniquely me, but at the same time, I have to listen to the feedback of the people around me, which leads me to last week's special podcast episode, which is the profile of David Bond. As you may notice, there's a different tone and cadence to the way I'm speaking right now for a very particular reason. And sort of paying attention to the feedback that I was getting off of that video, it seemed as if, and I get some pretty harsh ones, which I'll discuss here in a little bit. I got some really nasty ones where people were saying, well, I mean, there were some weird ones where people were saying, like, David needs to find God and, weird stuff like that. But for me, it was bro, are you, like, high? Are you stoned? Are you retarded? That stuff is the rough stuff. And that's because I have an impression, an idea in my mind of what my podcast, what this show ought to look like, because there are shows that I follow. I follow the Jocko podcast. I follow the Tim Ferriss radio show, the Tim Ferriss podcast. I follow Hardcore History. What else? There's another really good one that I follow as well. Let's see. I can't remember it. It'll come to me in a second. But all of these things sort of define the style that I want to put forth in this particular program. And so I try to exude that, especially in the tone, the sort of slower tone that I was presenting in the prior podcasts. It's a lot closer to sort of the Jocko style. It's not very bombastic and loud. And I don't want it to be that way, because I notice that I can be that person, but over time it gets very exhausting. But at the same time, one of the pieces of feedback that a friend actually gave me is that it seemed as if, and this is my impression of it, it seemed as if I wasn't fully me, that there was sort of an imbalance, a dissonance, a disconnect between who I was presenting myself to be and the person that they knew. And them knowing that I was a little more bombastic. I apologize for the nasally sound, by the way, because I am sick. I'm doing this at 4 a.m, but this has got to get done, because if this were me going to a job, I'd have to do it anyways. But anyways, the point here is that the feedback was that I was not presenting myself in as realistic of a way as possible, which was, one, discussing specific points, and two, it seemed like I was being all too professional. And I want to clarify something about that. For those of you who gave me feedback on the prior video about David Bond, and sort of want to understand where I'm coming from. The thing is, I'm not necessarily creating this broadcast to be for his, I would say, demographic. I understand that it will pull in people from his demographic because of the sensational nature of the content, as well as the picture for the thumbnail. But the point is, I'm creating this content specifically for people in my BNI group, and the people in my BNI group are professionals and business owners and people who are who I feel need specific advice in leveraging social media through podcasts, through Facebook, through Instagram, through all the usual things that we take for granted. And so one of the interesting pieces of feedback that I actually responded to is that somebody was saying, like I've heard this before. Like, David Bond talked about all the things that you just mentioned, so what was the point of this video? And the thing is, I understand where that can come from, where if you were to watch a lot of David's content and then to come back to look at mine, it's like, well, it does seem redundant, and it seems redundant to you because you're already a fan. But the thing is, not everyone is a fan, and not everyone is aware of David Bond, and that is the audience that I'm trying to speak to. So if I hope that makes sense. That though it may seem a little bit redundant, I'm giving it my different, unique perspective, and even if it is just me speaking on that to my particular audience, to my particular demographic, I'm still sharing that information for them. And I apologize if it does come off as a little bit repetitive, because which I have to get to that point too. It did come off a little bit repetitive because I did create that content also very late at night, and also because I really didn't know how to present David in a way that wasn't all too sensational, because there's already a lot of sensationalism around David. And I wanted this content to be consumable for the demographic, again, for the BNI group that I engage with on a weekly basis. And maybe I was pulling punches, maybe I was being way too professional as one of the pieces of feedback was from my friends. But I can certainly be more, as you noticed, I can certainly be more energetic, and I can certainly be more forthcoming in my energy in the way that I speak about this, and come off with a little more passion than being someone sleepy at 2 a.m, as if I'm trying to have like a sexy late night broadcast. And I do apologize for that if that's how it came off, because that's certainly not what I want to do. And come to think of it, for me, information is information. So the dryness of a piece of information, like reading a math book, is if something is dry or boring and you listen to it, like I think Dan Carlin from Hardcore History may not be your cup of tea, but if what you're trying to glean off of hardcore history is embedded within hardcore history, then for me, a lot of times it's like it doesn't factor in. Like, I don't care that the person is boring. Like, or not to say that Dan Carlin's boring. I love his content. And though I may love his content, some of my friends may not give two shits about it because they may feel that Dan Carlin's content is a little too boring, a little too dry. They may not care about history in general. You may care more about entrepreneurial stuff. You may care more about science and math. And so that being the case, I want to apologize first off, but second off, understand that where I'm coming from is oftentimes if you're coming to watch my content and if you gain even an ounce, even like 1% of 1% of anything off of it, then it's already a win. And oftentimes I do feel, at least from the feedback that I was getting from the demo that I was speaking to, that it was working. And so I didn't feel entirely too bad. That, and again, just to wrap this point up, again, I do appreciate that for the people that were vocal enough to actually leave criticism on that video, because this was just a big deal for me this week, as you can probably tell. If you were willing to leave criticism on there, I feel that it's worth me engaging in that conversation and sort of explaining myself and letting you know where I'm coming from, but also taking in your advice, taking in your words and what you say, as me coming off as a little too boring, me coming off as if I'm like high on pain meds. And by the way, I'm not high. I don't smoke. I don't do any of that stuff. I maybe drink on occasion, but I'm like coming off of that. I'm like removing that entirely, because generating this content and being able to create all this stuff is more exciting to me than getting high. So I want you to understand that as well. So just to answer that. Also, another point that someone discussed, should I do something on the Logan Paul versus KSI thing? Very enticing to do that sort of stuff. Just as some of the criticism was that people were saying that I was sort of riding David's coattails, but I don't necessarily want to get caught up too much in following or following up on content or sensational stuff, clickbaity stuff, because where that stuff is easy, and I appreciate the 1,000 views that I got and the, I think, over 18 followers that I got off of David's video, because it is so wide-reaching. I do appreciate that, but I don't want to go down that path, because what inevitably will happen is that I'm just going to keep trying to keep up with the Joneses and looking for something else sensational rather than talking on things that I necessarily want to talk on. And I really want to focus on this particular platform to be informative for the people that can make use of this information. And to wrap this up for that particular case, because I am coming close to the end of this recording window, to wrap that up, I want the people who do listen to this, my demographic, the people that I interact with at the BNI group, I want you to understand that this is sort of part of the experience of putting yourself out there, that you will get criticism, and it's always best to just see it as feedback, because it's going to happen. And one thing that I've realized in my 34 years on this planet is that it's not necessarily, people don't necessarily give you feedback in the best way. And it may come off as hatred if you want to see it in that context. And if you get bombarded with enough of it, it can be very painful, because it's hard to sift through it. And the process of changing whatever situation needs to be. Like, for example, like me being more energetic, if that needs to be changed, it can be a lot of effort to change that, especially with all of the work involved in creating something like this. So piecing together the podcast, producing it, and then on top of that, having to create or having to feel like you're creating a different persona can be a lot of work. And so that may be the case, but if you know that on the other side of that, especially as a business owner, especially as someone who's trying to broaden your reach, and especially if you do get some metrics, some measure that people do respond to the new you better, then it's probably worth investigating. And it can be hard. Like if you look at, let's go back to David Bond. He got a lot of backlash, but this was intentional. He did this on purpose. He got a lot of backlash and leveraged that negative press to actually shine the light on himself, and then leverage that into creating something that the info products that allow him to live the life that he wants. So if that's part of sort of your mission statement, the thing that you're trying to do, then it's worth doing. In this particular case, it's a balance for me. Like I don't want to get caught up in following sensational stuff, but at the same time, I know that it gets views, it gets attention, and I appreciate that. But it all depends on how much criticism you can stomach and how much BS you can deal with, because it might be too much. And then at some point you do, and a lot of content creators will do this as well. They'll have a limit on the amount of feedback that they can take in, because obviously you can't change the entirety of who you are. I think if anything, the feedback that I've gotten is only asking me to step into what I already am, rather than trying to present myself as this more toned down person and whatnot. Anyways, we are here wrapping up on time right now. And with that, I hope you enjoyed this particular podcast. I actually did like this. It was, I really appreciate the feedback, because it called me out and asked me to step into more of what I feel is more naturally me. So I appreciate it in spite of my own frustrations about the feedback. If you happen to like this, and if you're listening to this on iTunes, go ahead and give it a 5-star rating and leave a comment. Leave any bits of wisdom that you may have. Like, I do appreciate the feedback. Of course, like, try to be nice. I don't really care so much. I'm going to take Tim Ferriss's tact. Like, I don't necessarily care what you said to me, but try and play nice with one another, because, it is a community. And if you start attacking one another, I'm not going to tolerate that. I'll just go ahead and delete your comments. So go ahead and give it a 5-star review. If you happen to be watching this on YouTube, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. If you enjoyed this, I'm going to go and make a point to be this way more often, be more myself more often. Go ahead and subscribe, and make sure to click that notification bell so that you can get updated and informed of when the next podcast or the next videos come out, because I do come out with tutorial videos for small businesses and how to leverage video, podcasts, and social media. So go ahead and check that out. And go ahead and check me out on Instagram. Go ahead and check me out on Twitter. I do try to make more of a point of being on there. And if you're even interested in doing this, go ahead and check me out on Musical.ly as well, which I will hop on here in a second and do some stuff on while I'm here in front of the mic. That being said, thank you so much for your feedback. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Echelon broadcast. Thank you so much for checking out everything that I'm doing. I appreciate everything that you guys have been saying, even though that's a bit frustrating at times. And I will see you next time. Peace out.